If your daily routine is stealing your ability to sense the subtle, you'll feel this right now. The title is blunt because the truth often is. The smallest, most repeated things we do every day are the ones that dim our inner light. I want to give you a clear test and a simple practice you can use tonight to protect or begin to reawaken what many traditions call the third eye, a sensitivity often linked in esoteric language to the pineal. This is not medical advice. It is an experiential invitation offered from a line of teachings that calls us back to our own verification. Some of the oldest counter-narratives about spiritual authority come from bodies of writing that were not part of the mainstream history we learned in school. In collections commonly referred to as Nag Hammadi, and in Gnostic texts such as what scholars call the Gospel of Philip, there are gestures toward methods that let someone know for themselves whether an inner connection is alive, without having to accept a second-hand claim. These sources are part of a tradition that says the body itself can carry signatures of origin. I say this with qualifiers. These are interpretive texts. They belong to a certain stream of thought and should be treated as such. Yet across many practices there is a repeated idea. Embodied memory, anamnesis can be felt, checked, and recognized. What I'll offer is a bridge between that older language and a practical, contemporary way to test your sensitivity. We'll use 3 gentle, safe body checks that mirror descriptions in these traditions. A point at the base of the skull, a subtle place along the hand, and the center of the chest above the sternum. Think of them as waypoints on a map of attention. Each one has a symbolic function: origin, perception, command. In modern terms, you can relate the second and third to perception or seeing, and to an inner authority or voice. The routine habits you keep, late screens, fragmented sleep, constant stimulation, are often the quiet erosion that puts those waypoints out of range. We'll both check and then give a short nightly practice to begin reclaiming those senses. Before we begin the checks, set something simple. Sit comfortably, or stand if you prefer, with your spine supported. Keep your eyes soft. If you are driving or in any situation that requires full attention, postpone this. These checks are slow, intentional, and gentle. They ask nothing of your body beyond a light touch and a steady attention. First mark, the place of origin. Locate the base of your skull where your head meets your neck. You will feel a subtle ridge, a place where the bones meet the soft tissue. With the fingers of one hand, very lightly touch that area. If it's easier, use the pads of your fingers rather than a firm press. Hold that light touch and bring your awareness toward the point behind your ears and the crown's lower edge. Breathe slowly as you do. Notice any warmth, pressure, coolness, a sense of space, or even nothing at all. Some people report a small electric hum, a dissolving of tightness, or a quiet settling. Others notice an emotional response, a softening, a memory. Any reaction is valid. Any absence of reaction is also fine. The point here is not to prove anything to someone else, but to develop a habit of checking in with your own sensation. Second mark, the hand of perception. Extend one hand slightly and look at the little finger side of your palm, the soft area between the base of the little finger and the wrist. This is not a dramatic point. It is subtle, an edge where touch meets dexterity. With the opposite hand, use a gentle fingertip to explore that area. You may trace along the space between bone and tendon, feeling the slight give of soft tissue. Bring attention to the sensation of touch, and also to the extrasensory quality, the way attention sharpens a single point of the body. Some people experience a widening of awareness or a tiny brightness in the field of mind when this spot is acknowledged. Others feel nothing but calm. Again, both are fine. Note whether something shifts in your breathing, your posture, or in the clarity of an inner image. This mark, in symbolic terms, is where perception is rehearsed. Third mark, the center of command. Place your hand lightly on the middle of your chest, above where your heart sits, resting on the sternum. You can use the flat of your hand, fingertips, or both. whatever feels natural and easy. Bring attention to the point directly behind your touch. In many traditions, this chest center is described as the hinge between feeling and expression, a ground for authority that is not aggressive but true to the self. When touched with intention, it can feel like a deepening, a small arriving. People often report a warmth, an opening, or the sensation of a voice that is steadier, not louder, a clarity about what is true for them in the moment. This mark is where you might feel the echo of the other two. Origin and perception meeting and saying, yes. Now I'll guide you through a calm, deliberate body check. You can follow along in sequence. Keep your touch light, your breath steady. Notice any urge in your mind to judge, explain, or disqualify what happens. That urge is part of the test. Begin by settling into your breath. Inhale naturally through the nose. Exhale through the mouth if that feels easier. Allow your shoulders to soften. Bring attention to the base of your skull and touch it lightly with the pads of your fingers. Hold that presence for a few breaths. What do you notice? Name it quietly to yourself. Warmth, coolness, stillness, pressure, emotion. If nothing appears, name stillness. Don't argue with what you feel. Calling it by a simple word anchors the noticing. Move your hand to the lateral side of your palm, the little finger side between the base of the finger and the wrist. Rest your fingertips there. Pay attention to the texture, the subtle signals between touch and sight. Notice if your inner field widens, if images become a little clearer, if your breathing smooths. If thoughts arise that dismiss the experience, this is nonsense. This is my imagination. Recognize them as usual mental commentary. Say to yourself in a soft tone of curiosity, I hear that voice, and then return to bodily sensation without argument. Finally, place your hand on the center of your chest. Keep your attention steady. Bring to mind the idea of a voice that speaks from presence rather than from fear. Feel how the chest point receives the touch. Notice any movement in the throat, an inner willingness, a steadying in the spine. It might be subtle. It might be profound. Whatever occurs, observe it like a scientist of your own interior. Label it, allow it, and let it be. If you experienced heat, pressure, a shift in your breath, an inner clarity, a tiny, soundless yes, or any other response, type the word recognition in the comments right now. That simple act both records your experience and builds the little community of those who are checking. If you felt nothing, you can still type recognition to mark your intention to keep practicing. Both responses are part of the path. Expect resistance. The mind will offer explanations, neat, rational, and often dismissive. It will tell you this was imagination, coincidence, or wishful thinking. It will try to reduce the experience into a story that keeps you safe in familiar disbelief. That voice is not an enemy. It is a condition of habit. Name the thought when it appears. That's resistance. Then, without arguing with it, return your attention to the touch, the breath, the point. Over time, the pattern of noticing the thought and not following it weakens the hold of automatic denial. Now we move to a simple activation you can use tonight. This is a 3-part declaration, each line paired with the corresponding mark. Place your right hand at the base of your skull and say, quietly or aloud, I recognize my origin. Move your hand to the lateral side of your left hand and say, I open my perception. Place your hand over the center of your chest and say, I speak from my center. Repeat the sequence a second time with the same attention and treat the words as anchors for what you have already felt. The phrasing is intentionally practical and free of grandiose promises, recognition, opening, speaking. Speak them softly and with attention. As you do this activation, listen for the immediate internal objections that might arise. This won't work. I'm making it up. Who am I to claim authority? And notice them. They are predictable. Observe them as part of the ritual, Like clouds passing over a sun you already know is there. Do not try to argue them away. Return your attention to the touch and the words. The practice is less about proving the reality of an inner phenomenon to anyone else, and more about training your nervous system to reorient to a subtler axis of sense. Why does routine matter so much in this equation? Routine is not neutral. Each repetition of a habit sculpts the field of attention. Late night scrolling, bright screens before bed, irregular sleep windows, constant task switching, caffeinated spikes, a home lit by cool or very bright light into the late hours. Each of these elements trains the nervous system toward external stimulation and away from inward reception. Traditions that pay attention to the pineal or the third eye have long advised ways of living that quiet the outer noise so the inner voice can be heard. I am not making a medical claim. I am pointing to an experiential logic. If you want to cultivate a subtle sensitivity, you have to change the conditions that constantly demand your outer focus. Here are practical, gentle adjustments you can try tonight. These are experiential suggestions rooted in the idea of protecting subtle perception. They are not prescriptions. 1. Dim the light an hour before bed. Shift to warmer, softer lamps instead of bright overheads or cold white LEDs. The goal is to reduce sharp visual stimulation so the eyes and the nervous system can transition from outward vigilance to inward reception. 2. Create a short unplug ritual. Choose a brief window, 20 to 40 minutes before sleep, when screens are put away. Use that time to read something calming, write a sentence about your day, or simply sit with the activation phrase and the 3 light touches. The point is to create an island of non-interruption. 3. Keep a consistent sleep window. Choose a bedtime and wake time that you can reasonably maintain most nights. Routine of rest trains the body's cycles in a way that supports steadier attention during waking hours. 4. Brief breath before bed. Spend 2 or 3 minutes with slow, even breathing, in through the nose for a count that feels natural, out through the mouth or nose for the same count. As you breathe, move through the 3 light touches again, gently, and let the words of the activation rest in your mouth as a soft mantra. 5. Reduce multi-screen multitasking. When you must use devices, do one thing at a time. The practice of single focus is a rehearsal in perception. It strengthens the habit of noticing subtle shifts rather than being perpetually pulled outward. 6. Introduce darkness for sleep. A darker sleeping environment, free from bright LED indicators and with low ambient light, is traditionally suggested in many contemplative cultures to create a threshold of inwardness. If full darkness is not possible, use a soft nightlight pointed away from your eyes. Each of these suggestions is meant to be practical and reversible. Start small. Try 1 or 2 changes tonight, not everything at once. The invitation is to disrupt the rhythm that favors constant outer input. There will be occasions when nothing seems to change. There will be nights of insomnia, attention that fragments, or feelings of nothing. These are not failures, they are data. Treat them as such. The practice is cumulative. Small habitual shifts over weeks retrain the nervous system. The ancient traditions spoke of a patient sequence, checking, naming, repeating, and trusting the slow work of reorientation. They warned against seeking immediate spectacle. Instead, they offered methods for self-verification, for learning to feel the fact of one's own attention rather than outsourcing certainty to others. Remember the narrative frame. Some Gnostic texts suggest that certain teachings were marginalized because they offered direct means of verification, ways for individuals to test whether they were aligned with an inner source, sometimes called the mon or monad. The language in these texts also describes intermediaries, forces, or archons that can distract and mediate perception, and part of the practiced path is learning to notice those mediating patterns rather than being dominated by them. Whether or not you accept that cosmology, the practical upshot is simple. Cultivation of quiet forms of attention disrupts habitual mediation. The body can act as its own archive of origin if you learn to read its signals. If you felt anything during the checks, a warmth, a pressure, a picture, a steadying, type recognition in the comments now. That single word does two things. It registers a moment of witnessing, and it connects you to others who are practicing the same check. If you felt nothing, you can still type recognition to mark your willingness to continue. This channel is not proof of mastery. It is a community anchor for people who are experimenting with subtle practice. Before we close, one caution about the inner temptation to make sweeping claims. Any extraordinary sense you experience should be tested over time. Do not rush to declare dramatic outcomes. The value of this work is not in immediate flashy signs, but in the slow reorientation of your life's conditions, the small habitual interruptions you remove, that allow a quieter, steadier voice to emerge. Be kind to yourself. Doubt is natural and, paradoxically, often a reliable companion on a genuine path. It prevents credulity and keeps curiosity awake. Let us finish with a concise, guided activation you can carry into your evening. Place your hand at the base of your skull and say softly, "I recognize my origin." Move to the lateral side of your hand and say, "I open my perception." Place your hand at the center of your chest and say, "I speak from my center." Repeat the 3 lines once more with the same care. You can do this as a brief ritual tonight before you dim the lights, or as a moment of pause between the bustle of your day and the steadiness of sleep. The central claim I return to is this: routine, the repeated small things we do every day, is the most effective enemy of subtle perception. Not because routines are evil, but because habits of constant outer attention are corrosive to the delicate architecture of inner noticing. If you want to cultivate the sensitivity that traditions name as the third eye, begin by changing the conditions that always ask you to look outward. Subscribe for the next activation, where we'll expand this into a short nightly sequence and work with subtle attention over a week. In the meantime, practice the 3 checks. Try one routine adjustment tonight. And, if you noticed anything at all, type recognition in the comments. This path is not about instant power. It is about learning to remember together how to attend.